Introduction to Material Design Widgets. Introduction to Material Design. In this video, we're going to define material design and look at the components that follow material guidelines. Material design is a design language that was developed in 2014 by Google. It allows us to build bold, beautiful products by uniting style branding, interaction, and motion under a consistent set of principles and components. It synthesizes the classic principles of good design with the innovation of technology and science. Create a new project and select Flutter. Type the project name, which should all be in lowercase, and use underscores for spaces. It is optional to give the project a description. Choose Java for Android and Swift for iOS, but it doesn't matter because you'll be writing code in Dart. When we first create a Flutter project, a default app is created. Run this app on the Android emulator by selecting Android SDK for x86. Both emulators were running before IntelliJ was started because they take a while to start up. Only the default Flutter app is running on Android. The beauty of developing apps on macOS is that you can develop for Android and iOS at the same time, and that in itself is a game changer. Run this app on the iOS simulator by selecting iPhone XS Max. In less than a minute, we have two apps running side by side for Android and iOS. If you click the floating action button or FAB on each, you will see that the counter increases. If you want to build a great app, you need to follow the material design guidelines. Let's take a look at overview, and the first thing that we see is material theming. The default app that we looked at earlier came with a built-in baseline theme that can be used as is straight out of the proverbial box. If you want your app to stand out, you should add customization. You also have access to a material theme editor, which is a plugin for the Sketch app. Sketch is a great app for designers and developers, and it's $99 for a license. Since the default app only has a button, let's see if it adheres to material design guidelines. Buttons can be placed in dialogues, modal windows, forms, cards, toolbars. They should be identifiable, findable, and clear. There are different types of buttons. Buttons that are used for low emphasis, medium emphasis, and high emphasis. We even have toggle buttons. There are even examples of best practices and worst practices. For example, you shouldn't wrap text in a button. You should use capitalization for languages that allow capitalization. Let's take a look at the floating action button guidelines. The FAB performs the primary or most common action on the screen. It appears in front of all screen content, typically as a circular shape with an icon in its center. If your primary action was composing email, a FAB would be okay. You don't need them on every screen. You shouldn't have multiple FABs on screens, but you'll notice that Google Maps can get away with this because they're Google. A FAB represents the primary action on a screen. A FAB's action should be constructive, and it should be relevant to the screen on which it appears. The FAB usually has a container and an icon, and the app's color scheme determines the fill that will be used in its container. When designing your FAB icon, make sure it's not ambiguous, and don't place text in a regular FAB. Individual components such as cards cannot each have their own FAB. FABs should use primary positive actions and avoid using minor overflow, unclear, or destructive actions. From here, you can see that a lot of thought should go into app components if you want them to adhere to material guidelines.